Well, if you were wondering how long it would take for Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to lose control of his front bench in 2024, the answer was 2 weeks. The more things change, the more they stay the same, because Foreign Minister Penny Wong left for Israel this morning, but she's opted not to visit the October 7 massacre sites. And when the PM was asked about it this morning, whether he supports that decision, he simply wiped his hands clean.
Penny Wong's itinerary is a matter for her. I've got to tell you, what I don't do is have a precise itinerary of all of my ministers. But Penny Wong will be meeting with survivors and families of victims from the October 7 terror attack in Jerusalem. She'll also be meeting with communities who've been impacted by settler violence in the occupied Palestinian territories.
You know, it's all a laugh. I mean, it's hard to think of a weaker Australian leader in recent history. As Prime Minister, leader of the government, you must have a view on whether the Foreign Minister should visit the very sites that have necessitated her visit to Israel in the first place. If there was no war, there'd be no visit. And if there was no October 7 attacks, there'd be no war. Is the PM seriously trying to suggest that Wong's itinerary was a matter for no one but her? And surely his office would have seen and approved that itinerary some time ago. Albanese, or at the very least his office, should have known she wasn't going to the massacre sites. And that's the government's prerogative. We know they've been consistently weak on anti-Semitism and called for a ceasefire in Gaza. You had ministers like Ed Husic and Anne Ali effectively accusing Israel of war crimes while the PM was speaking out the other side of his mouth. But the PM says he didn't have a precise itinerary, i.e., he didn't know she wasn't going there. What are you doing as Prime Minister, sending the Foreign Minister to a significant foreign conflict and not knowing where she's going or who she's planning to meet? She's not just representing herself as a private citizen, she's representing the government and the country. Visiting the massacre sites is a simple and symbolic gesture from one Western ally to another. Albanese, as you heard, refused to provide unequivocal support for the decision. So either he knew, and now he's throwing Wong under the bus and saying, well, it wasn't my choice, or he had no idea. Both options are just as bad as each other. Simon Birmingham has been there. Labor MPs Josh Burns and Michelle Ananda-Rajah have been there. Andrew Wallace, Zoe McKenzie, Scott Morrison, they've all been. But the Foreign Minister can't make it. It's not a great start to the year for a Prime Minister who finished 2023 on the back foot. And as the Houthis attempt to attack a US warship in the Red Sea today, Albanese again refused to provide any further support to peacekeeping in one of the world's most important trade routes.
We have operational support there at headquarters in Bahrain. We always give proper and considered analysis and act in Australia's national interest. And that's been the basis of our support up to this point. Of course, our concentration is on the Indo-Pacific, which is something that is supported by our allies.
If Albanese is today setting the tone for the rest of the year, then he is in big trouble. The final 2.5 months of the year after loss of the voice were, as we know, marred by dysfunction and a lack of control for the federal government. They were well behind the 8 ball on the release of immigration detainees. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill, Immigration Minister Andrew Giles, they weren't seen for days after ex-detainees allegedly reoffended. They were behind the 8 ball on anti-Semitism, and there was no consistent message from the government there, and they managed to turn the polling in favour of the opposition. The latest polling last week from Roy Morgan had the opposition ahead 51-49, and a news poll just before Christmas found voters rated Peter Dutton as more experienced, more decisive and stronger, and having a better understanding of the big issues than the PM. Now, as I've said before, Dutton was effectively leading the government from the opposition in the final months of last year. Now, you can be a thoroughly unlikable and polarising politician, but voters ultimately look for leadership and stability. Daniel Andrews, for instance, was one of the most hated politicians in the country, but he also happened to be one of the best politicians in the country at the art of politics. He looked in control, and that ultimately won the day again and again. Dutton may be polarising, and he mightn't have the public likeability of Albanese, though those who know him in private will know that that is not true. But he keeps proving, unlike the Prime Minister, that he is a leader. You couldn't fathom the idea of Dutton saying, well, the Foreign Minister's itinerary is a matter for her, because it would never have reached that point. If this is anything to go by, 15 days into 2024, then Albanese is in for a rough year.